I'm now joined by GIBS Dean, Professor Nicola Kleyn, as well as Leadership and Governance on the back of the Minister Pravin Gordhan's appointment. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nicola. Good to have you with us. I take it you woke up to the shock and horror as everyone else does, but what does this tell us about the landscape regarding leadership in South Africa?
I think, Guguleta, thank you for having me, first of all. You know, I wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago that was published in the Business Day where I spoke about 4 characteristics that leaders needed to exhibit. And one of them was visibility. I said we need voice, we need to hear from people. And I think what the last week has shown us, and I'm talking about leaders across the board, is that there are certain sectors of society where leadership and voice is blooming, notably civil society. You know, I'm fascinated by the role that social media is playing. And this decision that we heard last night, which I must admit was much better news than the decision that we heard last week, certainly for me, in my private capacity and as Dean of the school, really I think is testimony to the importance of voice and of people taking a stance and of people saying when things are not good enough. Is it going to be enough to say that this in itself represents something that's going to save us? Absolutely not. We are sitting in a fragile economy. Our growth has been lackluster. I think what this does is it settles the water. We've seen some recoveries. But in terms of the job of leadership, it now really starts. So my call would be, first of all, for Minister Gordhan to be coming out as the strong leader. We know him, and I think he's already done that today. He's spoken with intent, he's spoken with integrity about what needs to happen. He's slipped seamlessly, certainly on the face of things, into that role. But we need more leadership.
What does this also tell us about the leadership that's been displayed by the President when it comes to decisions which are taken very quickly, announcements made very drastically? Does this also show that potentially, you know, leadership, one thing's power, control? Is there a perfect balance between some of these elements?
I don't think there's a perfect balance, but I think what we have seen is a lack of consistency is really dangerous for leadership. It was one of us, I spoke just now about the need for visibility. Yes. One of the other things I said is consistency. So we need purpose-driven leadership where we don't chop and change as the winds change. And certainly, you know, the President's action are not consistent with what a good leader would exhibit under these circumstances. I think business, and I talk not only of the local community, but the international business community, has been giving feedback for some time now that says, give us some kind of consistent policy. And 3 finance ministers in 1 week doth not add up to consistent policy, that's for sure.
Exactly.
I think it's also created a great sense of nervousness, perhaps, you know, amongst various communities, that says it talks to this realization of how much power sits with the President. So the number of conversations I've had with people who've said, but how can this happen? How can we chop and change like that?
Without consultation.
Exactly. So on one hand, it's a testimony. This week could not have happened without some sort of vibrant democracy. The President feedback from the President himself saying, I have listened, I have heard, I think is a very, very good sign. Not necessarily for the President, but for the state of our democracy. But we've got lots of work to do.
Are there lessons? Naturally, you head up a business school, so clearly there must be lessons here that can be implemented and identified for future leaders, as well as those, especially in the business fraternity, to learn from this going forward.
I think in addition to the consistency, there's an absolute need for teamwork. And certainly the last week's actions do not speak of teamwork. We haven't heard from the ANC about what transpired and who President Zuma engaged with in order to come to this decision. But what has been remarkable is the few senior members of the NEC who have spoken out and said they weren't aware of his decision to replace last week's finance minister. And to me, there's a leadership lesson in that. I mean, when we look at strong leaders, we look at leaders who are consistent, who have a clear sense of purpose, are able to call things and inspire hope. And that's not something that we've seen from our President in the last week. And also have reassure all of the stakeholders that there's a clear sense of ethical intent, that ultimately we're moving towards creating something better.
To close off with, I know it's a far-reaching question, but can we cultivate leadership within South Africa's society?
Of course. We're an unbelievably resilient nation. We have strong institutions. We've seen fees must fall, what I refer to as the green shoots of leadership. It's now, the time is now for strong leaders to stand up, and we have all the resources and skills available to do this. We just need to get on with it and do it.
Exactly. Thank you so much for joining us today and leaving it on a positive note. And again, getting down to cultivating those strong leaders we have in our economy. That was GIBS Dean, Professor Nicola Kleyn.